If you do any prospecting with LinkedIn, you have got to go get set up with Surf. That's SURFE. It's a tool you can use to add new contacts to your CRM system directly from LinkedIn in seconds. I'm using it every single day. I add contacts, follow my deals, keep track of notes, and it ends up saving me a bunch of time on prospecting and outreach, which means I can spend more time moving my deals along. The data is always 100% accurate since I don't have to copy and paste all the fields over from each and every contact that I want to put in my CRM. Instead, Surf does that all automatically with just one click in about 60 seconds. The team over at Surf has put together a very special offer for fans of sales players. There's a link down in the show notes, and you can use the promo code JWSurf5. Don't forget the E at the end of Surf. That's JWSurf5 for 5% off your first year. Don't spend another minute doing things manually. Go get set up with Surf. Hey, what's going on, SaaS sales players? It's me, Jesse, and I wanted to quickly address something, which is how come I haven't put out as many episodes as I used to, and why have the last few weeks been a little bit quiet on my part? So a few things here that are contributing to this. One, I've been involved in a handful of pretty active, pretty time-consuming deal cycles. This is very common in enterprise and strategic selling, and frankly, it's common across the board, even in SMB and mid-market selling, but especially when you're working on a strategic deal, it can take and zap, frankly, a lot of your creative energy because so much of your time and effort and work is going into getting all of your stakeholders on board and building a proposal and presenting it and coordinating everything and planning an implementation and a launch and all those things. There's so much that goes into it that it can sometimes take away from your creative energy. Now, this isn't the first time that I've done a massive deal cycle while also producing the podcast, but this particular go round has been especially busy. I'm coupling that with some personal and family issues that have kind of taken me away from the show in the early mornings and the evenings, which is when I used to work on things. And frankly, it's just been a little bit quiet on my part because I've been in a little bit of a creative slump, frankly. And I want to be candid about that because it is, terribly difficult to always be creating content. Now, part of your role as a seller is just that, it's creating content. So I know I'll get through it. And I've got some plans for some really great episodes. I have some fantastic guests lined up for the next couple of weeks. And it takes time to master those shows and, record the interview and then mix those shows and get those out. And then I'm hoping here in the next couple of weeks, I have some more free time to go and hunt down some of the people that I want to talk to in the industry. That's really where I think the best interviews that I've done have come from, is a combination of people in my network that I know are really interesting and doing interesting things, and then seeking out some of the big guns in the space and, finding those individuals, getting them on the show, coordinating with their assistants or their team in some cases, and coming up with a show plan and some of those things. So long story short, more content's coming. I'm absolutely not giving up on the podcast. Apologies that it's been quiet over the last couple of weeks. It was always my goal when I started the show was to try to at least create something every other week at minimum. And then I went through a period where I was consistently creating even a few times a week, which was awesome. But unfortunately, because of the fact that I still do have a day job as a seller, which part of that makes the show better because every single day I'm doing the same job that you're doing, which is prospecting, doing discovery calls, running sales cycles, and hopefully signing contracts. So hopefully that brings relevance to the show. But the downside to that is I just don't have a lot of hours in the day to commit. And in this exact quarter, this month, the last couple of weeks anyway, have been a very tough time to put out new content. So with that said, I wanted to put together an episode also addressing sort of the current climate of the tech industry. Now, if you're following along in the media, you know that there's been a lot of announcements about layoffs. If you've been active on LinkedIn, you'll see lots of posts of folks who are reporting that they've been laid off. And particularly, you're going to see a lot of these are in the tech space, which quite frankly is not something that I have seen too much of in my 10-year tech career. I wasn't in tech. I was actually quite young during the .com bubble. And, I started my tech career shortly after the 2008 Great Recession. And so besides a couple of little dips over the years and the 2020, COVID pandemic dip, I really haven't seen layoffs at this scale personally. I know I've heard stories from some of my older counterparts who lived through the dot-com bubble or the Great Recession. So I've heard all kinds of quote unquote war stories about, getting through, for example, the Great Recession in the SaaS business and trying to retain customers and keep deal flow going and things like that. So I'm familiar with sort of what happens. But frankly, a lot of this is new to me. I haven't been through anything like this. And I think I hope the worst of it's over. I hope it's short-lived. But I just don't have a crystal ball, and I don't think anyone really knows what's to come, frankly. So what I wanted to do was put together an episode that will hopefully provide some guidance if you've been laid off or if you're worried about being laid off. This might be some great ideas for you to prepare for that outcome. But if you have been laid off, this will also outline some ideas for how to get back on the horse and or get back on your feet anyway and keep going forward. So I'll start by sharing my story. I have never actually been laid off, and I don't say that to be, I don't say that to brag or anything like that. I've somehow been lucky enough to miss layoffs, and I've been at a company that has had to do layoffs, but for whatever reason, I missed those layoffs. And I think part of it is being in sales. Typically, unless it's really, really necessary, most SaaS companies will not tend to lay off sales professionals until it's very much the last resort. And I've heard that directly from a CEO of several CEOs of startups that I've been at, that, typically if they have to lay off, they'll find other areas of the business to start with. And only if it's absolutely critical will they start, shedding sales talent, because they realize that by doing that, you're essentially putting the death blow into the business, or you're kind of nailing the coffin. And so if you're letting go of your revenue producers and your revenue drivers in the company, then it's definitely not a very good sign. It's not good for investors. It's not good for the public, the customers. And it kind of sends the message to everybody that the company's more or less doomed. And that may be a little bit dramatic, but again, talking to some of the CEO founders that I've worked for, that's been pretty common. So fortunately, I've managed to miss a lot of layoffs, but I do want to tell you about how a few years ago, I was at a tech startup, a very early stage startup, where I walked off the job and, quit sort of on the fly without anything backed up. I didn't have another job lined up. I was just in a position where I felt like it was time to go. And if I remember right, I probably told my wife a couple days before that I was going to walk. And a few days later, I walked with nothing lined up. Now, at the time, I was, very confident. And in fact, before I had left, I had had some good conversations with my network, and I actually thought I had a role lined up. And it turns out that, so I walked away feeling like, okay, I already got another opportunity in the hopper, and it felt like a pretty good one. And I had, 2 or 3 people that I'd worked with before that were at this company helping to drive the decision. So in my mind, I was like, well, I can walk away from this startup and land on my feet over somewhere else, because I've already got this opportunity moving. I'd already done some of the interviews, and, I went through the whole process, and they gave me a verbal offer. And this was like within, a couple of weeks, really. So I walked from the job. A few weeks later, I was already getting a verbal offer. So maybe 2 weeks later, I was getting a verbal offer from this company. And so I was like, oh yeah, that was pretty short lived. I walked away from that startup, all good, fair and square. It was just time to go. 2 weeks goes by. I get a verbal offer from a great company. It was a remote AE position, paid incredibly well, great category, great product, all that good stuff. And I get the verbal offer on, I think, like a Thursday or Friday. And I was taking a road trip with the family and got on the road, take the phone call, get the verbal offer. It was awesome. And then they said, we're going to send over the offer letter, and you'll just sign that, and we'll get you started here in a couple of weeks. And so I was like, great, all in all, I maybe will miss like a month of work, and I'll start at this new role at a higher salary than what I was making before, and it'll all wash out, and here we go, and this is going to put me on the career path that I want to be on, by the way. This was a more established company. I was trying to get to a place where I could work with a bigger team and sell on a territory enterprise software. So fast forward a couple of days, didn't see the offer letter come over. I started to panic a little bit. My wife said, you're overreacting. they're probably just, they haven't gotten it out yet. Maybe someone needs to stamp it. Who knows? And several days went by, and I think it went into that following week. And I get an email from the hiring manager, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to be in your area." This is Austin. I was living in Austin at the time. He says, "I'm going to be in Austin next week. Why don't we just get coffee in Austin?" And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sure. Let's go." Yeah. When and where? And anyway, I drove all the way to downtown Austin. At the time I was living, 25 minutes away, make my way all the way to downtown Austin, pay for parking. I'm unemployed, so I have no income coming in. And at the time my wife wasn't working either. So, we're just living on savings. And, I go all the way out to this coffee meeting only to have him basically sit there over coffee and tell me, "Yeah, you know what? They froze hiring. And I know I made you the verbal offer, but I can't move forward with it. And I don't have like a time frame for that." And I don't remember what happened after that. I just know I somehow made it back to my car, and I was just devastated because I had not really been spending any time building a pipeline of new career opportunities because I figured I had this one in the bag. And again, I knew 2 or 3 people that were in decision-making positions for this role, or they were, semi decision-making positions. So I thought, and these people were telling me, "Oh, you've got the role. You've passed every interview round with flying colors. This is going to happen." And it didn't. It didn't happen because of a hiring freeze due to some poor performance in the business. And so I had nothing at that point. And I remember just kind of having a panic attack, frankly. I mean, it was terrifying looking ahead because by that point I'd killed over a month of time. And, again, living on just savings, that's not fun. Especially because it's expensive. It's expensive to pay rent, all that stuff. And I just, had no game plan. I hadn't really been diligent about building a big pipeline. I didn't have a lot of other at bats at that point. And frankly, and I'd actually started turning away opportunities as well. So I had a couple of recruiters where I had said, "No, I think I got an offer and I'm going to pursue this company," only to have that offer get, essentially revoked. So I know this has happened to a few people out there. I'm seeing some stories about this, and it's scary because I've been in that position, especially if you've, again, quit or you've walked away from another job, you get a verbal offer or even a written offer and it gets pulled back or revoked. It's a really scary thing. So I want to spend the rest of this episode just speaking to a couple of things that I did to get myself back on track. This was a tough year for me. This really actually, in some ways, changed how I think about my career. This was, you'll hear me talk a lot about on the show that I made a lot of big changes personally, mentally, and, professionally a couple of years back. I always say a couple of years back, but this was, as a result of this experience, because for a while during that time frame also, I wasn't sure if I was going to stay in SaaS sales. I was wondering if I should go do something else, if I should change industries, go take on a different role within a tech company that maybe wasn't a selling role. So I went through just a lot during that time period. So long story, I'll kind of cut to the end of the story just so you can hear, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the things that I did to help get me back on track. So fast forward, 3 months, basically 3 months of unemployment and over $10,000 burned through of our savings. It might've been more than $10,000. That's the number I'm choosing to remember because in hindsight, it could have been a lot worse. But, paying rent in a 3-bedroom house in Austin is not cheap. So, we burned through about 10,000 or more in that 3 months. And that's just, it's not fun. So a couple of lessons, and, hopefully this helps somebody out there who's either unemployed right now and they're in a bad headspace, or they're worried about, making it to next month and making the rent, or they're worried about keeping their career on track because, we've all been sort of brainwashed to think that having a gap in our career, even if it's 3 months, is detrimental to a career and that you'll have to explain it for the rest of your life. And so I'm here to say that everything ended up working out really well. And the best things that I've achieved in my career have actually happened since this experience. So I did a lot before that. I can talk to you a lot about, the selling I did before this experience, but frankly, the best opportunities, the best learnings, and now and the best money have come since I went through this experience. And, it was really tough. I had a lot of sleepless nights. I struggled to sleep. I had, just was stressed out all the time. And I worried a lot that, how would I explain it? And I'll also mention that this was after a couple of short stints at some tech companies. So this was me walking away from a startup that I'd been at for less than 6 months, or probably 6 months at the time I walked away. And before that, had only stayed a year at the company before that. So I was worried that, having a bunch of hops on the resume was going to also impact me, in addition to the fact that I was, unemployed. And so I had a deadline, right? I had, a very, very hard timeline to get hired again. So here's what I did. A couple things that I think will help. And if you're in this position, this should hopefully help you as well. So first, take some time if you can. I know it feels counterintuitive when you're like, hey, time's money. My rent's going to be due at the first of the month. I've got to get back on the horse and get something lined up. Please try to take a couple of days, maybe a week if you can, and just don't do anything. Watch your favorite Netflix series, go ride your bike, go take a walk, just go hiking. If you can take a trip or something, do that. And, I realize, a lot of people listening to this might be in a position where they can't go spend money if they're unemployed. And that's how I felt at that time. I didn't feel like I had the resources to be unemployed for very long. So I didn't allow myself to take a lot of, besides the fact that I thought I had something lined up, I didn't allow myself to take a lot of time away. And so I think go take some time to just recalibrate, recenter, and figure out what your next move is. Make sure, this is a good time to be writing, journaling, think about, if you're on the right track in your career, if you're doing everything that you'd set out to do, go write down a couple of goals. I really recommend spending some time outside. That did ultimately help me during that period where I was unemployed, was getting a lot of sunshine, fresh air, hiking trails, all that stuff, and try to get some exercise also, because it'll help, with those endorphins and things like that. And then, you're going to be able to feel more accomplished if you get out and do some exercise, do some outdoor time. So start there, do that. But then, in terms of some of the practical career-oriented stuff, here's what I started doing pretty quickly. Once I got the bad news that I didn't have this role, I very, very quickly started going through, and I'm very fortunate that my inbox in LinkedIn was pretty full of recruiters who'd reached out to me in the past. And if you don't have that, I would still suggest going and sort of hunting down some of the top tech recruiting firms and use recruiters, use paid recruiters to try to help you start to build a pipeline. This is just like selling software, right? You've got to go out and start networking and building a pipeline and giving yourself at bats, basically. So what I did was I started reaching out to all kinds of recruiters who had either reached out to me before, or, several colleagues of mine had heard about my situation and had sent me recruiters that they'd worked with on different roles, and said, reach out, see what this person has. And so I just started going into pipeline generation mode. I reached out to companies that I was interested in, that I'd never really, I'd always wanted to go work there, but hadn't found a path to that point. So it gave me time to kind of write down a couple of the companies that I was interested in working for. I started to network with recruiters, this has really been valuable even since, because I keep in touch with a lot of these recruiters, and I am now more aware of opportunities in SaaS. So go out and start to just use LinkedIn. One thing I didn't do was cancel my Sales Navigator. I set up a Sales Navigator account, even though it was expensive. And at every penny, I felt every dollar going out during those 3 months. I would still recommend keeping a LinkedIn Premium or a Sales Navigator account, so you can start to, so you have access to InMails and you can connect with people and send messages and some of those things. So go out and start networking. I networked with people like that do podcasts or sales thought leaders. There wasn't as many at this time, believe it or not. This was a few years ago. But hopefully if you're out there and you're concerned or you're unemployed or something, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and, I'll try my best to help point you to some resources. So I just, started kind of networking like crazy, and, called people that I hadn't talked to in years. That's, seems, again, counterintuitive. Your thoughts at the time are like, man, time's money. I got to go land the next thing. And what I ended up doing was circling around to some colleagues that I hadn't talked to in a long time, touching base with them, making calls, setting up meetings to just, touch base. And what I found from that exercise is a lot of them were aware of other opportunities and they were able to put those in front of me or connect me with somebody or a recruiter or something like that. So make a list of people you haven't touched base with for a long time. Maybe, teammates you've worked for in the past or worked with in the past, former managers, former CEOs. If you don't have any of those yet because you're early in your career, again, just, try to start getting yourself out there and searching for people in your network or, following people, getting in touch on LinkedIn, pick up the phone wherever you can and just make some calls. So I did a lot of that. I completely overhauled my resume during that time. And just really spent a lot of time thinking about what made me unique, what my quote unquote differentiators were and how I should sell myself going forward in these roles. So spend some time doing that. And then, there's a lot of resources that didn't exist back then. I think Outreach.io has like a job board. There's is it Bravo or Bravado? Let me see. I think it's called Bravado. And I'm going to look it up right now. Actually, Bravado. I think they have a job board. You probably just Google. Yeah. So Bravado, RepView, I think is doing something. I mean, there's all kinds of really cool resources that didn't exist a few years ago that are now here to kind of help awareness around sales roles. And I, at the time, even, considered taking something outside of tech in the sales category just temporarily until I got back into SaaS. So don't rule that out either. If you've got to pay your bills, don't hold out for the perfect SaaS AE role. You can totally go sell solar or, advertising or whatever you need to do in the interim while you then go look for your next SaaS role. And maybe it's not selling. Maybe you go do something else completely. Maybe you go work at, wherever you need to, at a retail store or something like that. So one of the things that I did to kind of stop the losses was I signed up for Uber Eats and I was out driving around delivering Uber Eats during that time. And actually in Austin during that time, I made a pretty decent amount of money doing Uber Eats. And and while I was doing it, I was listening to podcasts and trying to improve my craft and, listen to a lot of audiobooks and things like that. So you can really you can make it a force multiplier. You're making some money delivering food through Uber Eats or DoorDash, but you can use the time also to hone in on your craft and learn. So try some of those things. During the time, I also tried a few other money-making opportunities, things that I had always wanted to launch or do. I started doing some Facebook ad sales. So what I would do for that was just, basically Facebook ad arbitrage. I'd manage people's Facebook ad spends. So I did a little bit of that also to just try to stop the losses. And, so go out and find something to do, even if it's especially part-time, that gives you enough time to still focus in on your SaaS goals. What else did I do? So just ended up having a lot of great conversations with recruiters, mostly sourced through LinkedIn or email. From that, from those interactions, ultimately an opportunity came about. One of the biggest challenges that I had was after going through something like a layoff, and in my case, walking away, but still, walking away from a role without anything lined up, is I lost a little bit of like my mojo, my energy kind of went down and my confidence went down, frankly. So one of the things you have to be careful about is just really make sure you stay confident and you prep really well for interview rounds and you really keep a good poker face on, right? You don't want to worry too much about the fact that you've been laid off. And I think if I'd been laid off, I would just address it. I wouldn't try to hide the fact that I've been laid off because it's pretty provable out there in the marketplace and you don't want to create a bad impression. So just lean into it and say, look, I was part of the layoffs at XYZ company, but here's what I did well there, and here's how I crushed it there, and here's my action plan for success at your company. And I want to get started as soon as possible so I can show you what I'm capable of. So that hopefully helps somebody out there. Please reach out to me if I can be of assistance if you've been laid off or you're worried about being laid off. Now, for those of you who want to just continue chugging forward in your career, I might do a future episode about this. I might actually turn this into a course, but I want to talk more about building an action plan in SaaS. And this is something that I've used as I've interviewed in roles. It basically shows what you're capable of doing in the role and based on past experience and results and how you're going to achieve in your role going forward. reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about this. Jesse@jessewoodbury.com. I'm happy to share some of the details, but this is something that's helped me land, my current role, and I've seen it help others land some pretty significant roles in SaaS sales. So thank you for listening. Stay safe out there and stay positive. This is still a great industry. I'm still very long on SaaS sales as a recession-proof career track. You're generating the revenue for these SaaS companies that are incredibly high growth, incredibly high valuation. So stay the course. Even if you get laid off, I think it's temporary, a few months at most. This is not, the kind of thing where we're going to see people out of work for 18 months or anything like that. So thanks again for listening, and take care.